Let's talk about Dr. Lupo today, right after this. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome if it's your first time here. My name is Super Shadow, aka Pastor J. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at Dr. Lupo's Q&A session that he did and the responses that he gave to the question, what are your religious views? Now, for the 5 or 6 of you that maybe clicked on this video who don't know who Dr. Lupo is, I'll give a quick synopsis of who he is, what he's kind of done. But who he is, he's a Twitch streamer who really started to make a name for himself back in the Destiny 1 days. At least that's when I found him. But with the birth of Fortnite and the massive success that it was, Dr. Lupo grew right alongside of that. And as of the time of this recording, had around 3.3 million followers on Twitch and just about to hit like 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube, if I recall correctly. And so, along with that success and popularity, of course, came along awesome opportunities for this man to be able to both compete as well as host a ton of variety of Fortnite events that Epic has put on. And it was actually right before one of these events, between 2 major events, where he was able to do a Q&A session from his hotel room and stream that. And it was this no holds bar, ask whatever you want type of scenario. And after answering some, pretty staple standard things like what's his exit strategy and how many Oreos he could eat in a sitting, came a really interesting question. And so this video came out where he did the stream, he put it on YouTube, and then I got messaged by a ton of you guys to respond to this and to kind of break down some of his answers here. Now, before I do that, though, I just want to set this up correctly and kind of preface any of that with this. If you came to this video looking for me to just bash Dr. Lupo because of his popularity, to claim that he's a part of the Illuminati or a minion of the devil leading children astray by playing Fortnite in video games, I'm sorry, you've come to the wrong video. Because one of the things I really appreciate about what Dr. Lupo did in his response, just to start, is the fact that he's very open and honest about his beliefs and being very clear about what he believes, but also being very respectful of others who think differently. And so in today's video, rather than just bashing this man, because that's clearly what he could have did, we want to take this opportunity to really engage with what he had to say, because I think there's something there for both Christians and non-Christians alike to be able to look at and learn and grow from, and to be able to have a healthy dialogue. So like I said, I won't be covering every single word that he says. I'm not covering the entire Q&A session, just rather a couple of main things that main points that he brought out in his response to this question. So with that being said, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below to his video if you haven't seen that, which I don't know why you wouldn't. But if you haven't seen that, go ahead and take a look at it after this. It's actually really entertaining and really interesting. Dr. Lupo is like one of the few major big streamers that plays Fortnite that I could actually watch and enjoy and not get tired of like within 5 minutes of it. So go check him out. Go check this out. It's actually pretty funny and pretty entertaining. So, all right, so getting right into it, let's take a look at his first response after taking a second to think and really figure out what he wanted to open up his opening statement on this question to be. He said this. He says, as long as no one is hurting anyone else or causing harm, I respect everyone's belief. There's so many different sets of beliefs. Someone's gonna be right, but I don't know who. It doesn't really matter, and we don't have long enough to fight about it. Now, this first opening quote, there has a ton of different ways we can talk about it, but I want to start with just literally the first sentence here. Now, this belief, as long as it's not hurting anybody else, I think is something that's almost become a staple to most people in today's society. Regardless of your religious beliefs or backgrounds or upbringings, here, at least in the States, most people would say and agree that as long as you're not hurting anyone else, what does it matter? Now, it's interesting that as we look at this seems like a very noble and very encouraging thing. Like who out of any of us watching this video would go, actually, no, I want to do harm to people. Like that is my goal. Even as Christians, we are actually commanded in 1 Corinthians 8 to lay aside our Christian liberties and freedoms for people who it may cause harm to or cause them to stumble. So on the outside, looking in, on the onset, it looks like this is a great kind of general principle that we can apply to everything and anything, from wearing a bicycle helmet to whether or not I should study for an exam, to drugs, or anything like that. But when you really begin to examine that thought, this isn't a great principle, but rather it actually diminishes life. Let me explain real quick. To start, the understanding of what constitutes hurt is, I think, so vague. But I think we all can acknowledge and know that there's other types of hurts as well. There's not just momentary physical hurt, but there's emotional, there's spiritual, there's all sorts of ways, psychological hurts, that can happen to us. And so it's kind of hard to just nail down what do we mean by hurt. One of the things I would love to ask is, how do we determine that then? How do we determine what qualifies as hurt as what doesn't? Is hurt just related to our pain receptors, or is it related to a lot more? And you see how that opens up a door of that. And even when that question gets answered, if and when that question gets answered, the time of, well, how far along in the process are we talking about? Are we talking about if it just doesn't hurt that person in the momentary moments of when that action takes place and disregard anything in the future? If we're also talking about future events and how our actions now can affect the youth of today or the children of tomorrow, then that's an even greater thing to talk about. And so you start to see how this begins to unravel in so many ways. And so the question remains, how do we know what hurt is? How do we decide and know? None of us can predict and know this. It has the same, this principle of as long as has the same type of issue that utilitarianism has as well. Utilitarianism is just this basic belief that we should aim for the best results, that we should aim for the good of others. Whereas this as long as principle more so is just looking at and focusing at avoiding harm, right? We're not even trying to look for what's best for them. We're just trying to make sure we avoid hurting other people in our process of actions and thoughts or whatever it may be. And so you begin to see how with both of these, there's no way a single individual can know all the ways that one single action is going to affect or calculate everybody else. And so if our responsibility is just to make sure we don't hurt people, how can we do that well when we don't know how some of our actions? Just think about it. There are probably people in your life that have hurt you and they might not even know that they did it. So you begin to see how this as long as principle begins to start to break down. The last point I'll kind of make on this and how it diminishes life still in some way is that is the principle only applied to others and not to self. A person who decides to not wear a motorcycle helmet, they're not hurting others. Their decision to not wear a helmet, right? They're not breaking the law. They're not hurting anybody else, but it still could hurt and affect them. A kid who decides to not take his education seriously and to continue to just dwell and do what satisfies him in the moment and never really think about the future does himself harm. How many of us know people like this, but will use the principle, as long as I'm not hurting anybody, what does it matter? And so we begin to see how this idea that is seeped into our modern society typically hurts and diminishes the opportunities that we have in this life here. And that's one of the points when it comes to ethical principles. When it comes to they're meant not just to prevent hurt, but to actually be a guide for us into the future and into the rest of our lives. And so we begin to see how just that in and of itself, as gracious as I think Dr. Lupo was trying to be and diplomatic in that moment, the principle of as long as it doesn't hurt anybody isn't a really great foundational principle to stand on at all. Going on, Dr. Lupo then goes on to talk a little bit about his upbringing, how he grew up, mainly Roman Catholic, I take it from what it sounded like, going through the traditional steps of confirmation, of baptism, and so on and so forth. And Dr. Lupo said that it was there in college, when he was free of influence and kind of free to really be a thinker for himself, that this idea and concept kind of came to mind for him. And it was this understanding and acknowledging that kids get cancer, that there are 3-year-olds that get leukemia, and that he understood it from other people's perspectives, but that the most typical Christian or Catholic response that he would hear is that God has a plan. Dr. Lupo then says that if that's the case, if God's plan is to give a 3-year-old leukemia, he can't accept that. He doesn't want to be a part of that. Now, in talking about this, I don't want it to just be this thing that we hold out here that we're detached from and just kind of examining here, because the reality is pain is a true constant in the lives. And when talking about kids, it is heartbreaking to hear this and to see this. Philosophers, theologians, people have been dealing with this and wrestling with this since the beginning of mankind. And so it's categorized as the problem of pain itself. But there's a couple things that Lupo says in that response there that, like I said, he's being honest with where his heart is in that, but maybe a little bit misinformed with how people have understood it. Or maybe just the way that goodwill Christians, I don't know who these people are that have talked to him, that have shared these things, and maybe just skewed their understanding of it. Now, I understand. I've been in plenty of hospitals and in horrible situations where loved ones are on their deathbed and they're dying, and not that there are ever perfect words that you can give to people, to the family that is watching this happen. But I know for probably these people, as goodwill or intended as they were just drawing most likely from one of the most popular verses that everybody knows. It's on a bunch of coffee cups and mugs and posters, is this understanding of Jeremiah 29:11. The idea that God tells Jeremiah, I have plans for you, plans to prosper you, plans for a hope and a future. And so they take that concept and they just apply it, immediately to these things. But I think in that, what Dr. Lupo said, that God's plan is for a 3-year-old to get leukemia, that's not God's plan for that to happen. See, back at the beginning of creation, as Christians, we believe that God created all, and it was good. There was no pain. There was no suffering. Death was not even fabricated yet in this moment. And God saw all, and he saw it to be good. Created man and woman, and he gave them the ability to have choice and reason. Now that we can get into for a whole nother video. I don't want to make this an hour long. But God gives them that ability at the crux of it all because he wants true love to be attained. He wants them to have the free will to choose to love God or not to love God. And in that process, if them willingly choosing to follow God would lead to real true love. Just like anybody else, just like in any movie we watch, what makes us different from robots or servants is that we get the choice to choose. Do we not? If God just forced Adam and Eve to love him and to be with him, then that's not real love because you're taking that choice out of the option. And so with that choice comes the route to love God, but also to walk away from God. The choice to not listen to God. And God actually stacks the deck in favor to follow him. 99% of God's command that we see in the early chapters of Genesis are do this, eat, multiply, fill the earth. And then we get this one small percent where God says, here, if you don't want to follow me, if you don't want to do any of this, fine. Here's what you could do if you choose to not obey me. The one not thing to do is to not eat from this tree. And Adam and Eve, just like the rest of us, chose and believed that we're smarter than God himself and chose instead to go for that 1%. And with that came a slew of sin and brokenness that infected and plagued our world to this very day. A couple of things when it comes to pain that as Christians we need to understand. One is that God isn't the author of pain itself, right? God is the author of choice and free will and love. But with that has to alongside the option to choose to not follow God, which leads to pain, which leads to these things. Secondly, that looking at things like Romans 8 does talk about, and Jeremiah passages does talk about God having a greater redemption plan for the world. But it's not for everything. But for those who put their hope and trust in Christ, there is a plan. There is a hope. He will make this right. Thirdly, that God can use what is evil and broken and wicked in this world. And he can use it for good. Maybe not in this life, but in the life to come. He can use this still for good. Although he is not the author of it, God still will work through that and in that to bring about some type of good. Lastly, that although we all groan in our hearts, that it breaks every single moment because we know it isn't the way it's supposed to be. We know this isn't how life should be. We see what's wrong and broken, and we can only do that because in us still echoes the fragments of, as Genesis calls it, the image of God. We know when we see kids with leukemia, we know when we see people being mistreated or abused or hurt, that that's not the way life is supposed to be. And we long and crave for justice and righteousness in the world to rule. And Scripture says in the end that God will, one day, soon and very soon, make all things right. That God soon and very soon will make all things right. It says that he will wipe every tear from our eyes. And that the hurt and the pain that we experience in this world will be put to rest forevermore. We'll live in a world where their kids will no longer have leukemia. That world that we strive for here on the earth will one day be an actual reality for believers in heaven. And that's God's plan and redemption. And when we experience and see these pains, there's always one of two ways we'll go. One way is we'll turn to God as our anchor. We will call out to him for our saving grace. We'll hear God work through that. Or we can choose to turn away from God. And that is very much an ability and free will that God will not rob us of. He will not take that from us. He desires that all may come to know a knowledge of saving grace in him. But God is not going to force that upon you. God isn't going to make you believe, but allow you to have the choice to come to him or not. This ties in perfectly with the last thing Dr. Lupo kind of says. And I can applaud him for this general response almost, but he goes on to kind of close out all of this by saying, please don't stop believing what you guys believe. Just like I'm not going to stop believing what I'm going to believe. He's like, I'm not here to convince you guys of anything or to change your beliefs, just like you guys won't change mine. Now, like I said, he's super respectful throughout this entire thing. And I hope we've been somewhat respectful here and just more engaging with some of the things that he said. But the idea as Christians is that like we are going to convince anybody should never be what we're trying to do. God doesn't call us to convince people, to make people believe something. Just like we just said, God doesn't even make people believe things, and nor should we want people to believe things just because of us. Rather, as Christians, we're called to be a light in the world, to be a witness, and to have a truth and a reason for the faith that we have. That's what we're called to be and do. And so we should never seek to just have answers to bash people over the head and to make them look stupid or to really try to convince them, because then that's not lasting. If you beat someone in an argument, what good is that going to do? Except make them mad and not be able to see your point or see beyond how rude you were being. Same time, if you convince somebody of just because you're a wordsmith or because you have a good solid argument and they believe because of you and not because God working in them, then that's not going to be something that lasts. Then just when someone with a better, who can talk more smoother than you can and can convince them. Look, you see that cycle there? And so in response, in conclusion to all of this, my hope isn't to change Dr. Lupo. That's something that's God and only God can do. My job is to be a witness, to be an influencer on a platform like this, and just to be able to speak truth and engage with that, and to be able to help set the record straight on just what Christians actually do believe on some of these things. So in conclusions, what can we learn from all of this, both Christians and non-Christians? One, it's that we should be respectful. Specifically, I'm talking directly to Christians here, and sometimes I know they're not the most respectful people sometimes. They could be aggravating or frustrated or maybe even seemingly closed-minded at times. But the truth and reality is we're called to love our neighbors, and our neighbors don't always think the same way. And part of the way we do that is by having respect for them, and when given the opportunity to love on them. And our job isn't to convince other people to change their thoughts and opinions, but rather to be a witness to what God has done in our lives and to give a reason for the faith that we have and believe. Secondly, the big thing to note and to take away from all this is to know it's okay to believe something, but know why you believe it. And exactly that, be able to give a reason for why you believe what you believe, and not just hide behind a basic concept or idea. So that's pretty much all I had for this video, guys. Hopefully you liked it and learned something from it. It took me a long time. I had to film this 3 times over because issues. But in and through all that, guys, I hope you learned something from this. If you did, please let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like to let me know that you guys liked this video. And like I said, make sure you guys go check out Dr. Lupo. Even though we live in a fallen world and God has a plan coming, there is this opportunity we have now here on the earth to still impact and to help kids in need. And so regardless on where you fall on the spectrum here, we all know and get that cancer sucks, specifically for kids. Right now, GuardianCon is still going on, and big streamers like Dr. Lupo and others are raising money right now and are trying to reach their goal. So please, I'm going to leave the link down below. If you could give to this charity, all of it goes directly to St. Jude. None of it goes through any of the hands of these people. It goes directly to them and research for helping resolve cancer. So something we all can rally and get behind together. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and checking out this video. Hopefully you learned something new. If you did and want to keep checking some stuff out, here's a video on Does Theology Matter at All? Make sure you guys go and check it out. And let me know what you think on that one. Until next time, guys, know that you are valued and loved, and we'll talk to you later.